Tonight, CBN News exclusive.
Hi, folks.
Former Vice President Mike Pence on the life and legacy of the late founder of CBN News.
Pat Robertson was a man whose faith and his commitment to American ideals will impact generations of Americans.
And about the state of American culture today.
You know, sometimes it's darkest just before the dawn.
Plus, former President Trump faces dozens of felony charges.
If even half of it is true, then he's toast.
Set to be arraigned tomorrow. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. CBN News sits down with Mike Pence as we remember our founder, Pat Robertson. Good evening in Washington. I'm Jenna Browder. Tonight, an exclusive interview with the former vice president and presidential candidate. Mike Pence sharing his thoughts on Pat Robertson's impact on America and the world. CBN News chief political analyst David Brody caught up with Pence on the campaign trail in New Hampshire.
Hey, everybody. Hi, folks.
As Mike Pence begins his run for the presidency at traditional stops like Marianne's Diner in Derry, New Hampshire, he took time to sit down with CBN News and talk about something near and dear to his heart, the legacy of Pat Robertson.
Pat Robertson was a man whose faith and his commitment to American ideals will impact generations of Americans. And his testimony for Christ, and sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ, not just around America, but around the world, has literally changed lives.
Pence reveals the impact Pat made on his life.
I felt drawn to Christian broadcasting because I'd made a decision as a college student to accept Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Savior. And I got a copy of Shout It from the Rooftops. And I couldn't put it down, David.
And that book and Pat's obedience to Christ led to much fruit.
I know if Pat were still with us, he would give God the glory. But the debt that we owe to him as believers and as Americans, I think has to be paid with honor and remembering all that he did at CBN and far beyond that to impact the advance and the vitality of conservative traditional values in America.
Those conservative traditional values and the Republican Party, he, in essence, kind of joined them at the hip. I mean, he was a trailblazer in this area.
It's hard for me to imagine that the entire generation of Christian leaders, many of whom I've come to know personally, were not deeply impacted by his trailblazing boldness to step out as a believer and speak openly about his commitment to Christ and his commitment to traditional values.
Talk to me a little bit about the culture today. I mean, you know, Pat was so at the front lines of the cultural wars of the 70s and 80s, and he brought it into the forefront in the 90s with the Christian Coalition. But here we are today in a world that has gone haywire.
You know, sometimes it's darkest just before the dawn. And I sense among the American people a great anxiety and a great concern about where the country is. But I'm confident. I'm confident that God is not done with America yet. And the future that we chart, the foundation on which we build, I believe in large measure, in the last 50 years was poured by Pat Robertson.
David Brody, CBN News, on the road with Mike Pence in New Hampshire.
All right, thank you, David. And tributes to Pat's legacy have been pouring in since his passing last Thursday. His granddaughter, Abigail Robertson, is our White House correspondent, and she's with us now. Abigail, you know, when you think about your grandfather, what stands out to you in his legacy?
Wow, I think these past couple of days since his passing, I have been blown away by the amount of people who have reached out that I don't even know, telling me how just the impact of the words of knowledge from the 700 Club, a time that he prayed for healing, not having any idea who he was praying for, and they claimed that healing, and it radically changed their life. I mean, it's something I've always known, but I think I've just had a real surge and outpouring of it in the past couple of days. And I think another thing I've really been reflecting on is just how just obedient, just the impact of his obedience to Christ when the Lord called him and told him to sell everything.
Crazy stuff.
Yeah, and I actually did an interview with him in 2019 on his life and legacy, and I asked him, Granddaddy, why did you do that? And I want to show you that clip, and I want to show you what he said when I asked just about why he felt prompted from the Lord to do that.
You literally sold everything.
Yeah.
You left your old life completely behind. Did you ever have any doubts that you'd made the wrong decision?
Not then. I had, by that time, learned to trust the Lord, and I was filled with the Spirit, and I thought that the Lord would lead me, and I was being led by Him, and I wanted to follow His leading, and I believed in God. I believed in His power, and I had given myself to Him, and I knew that God would lead us, and God would lead me and speak to me, and I was counting on that as the source of my life's blessing.
And God sure did lead him. But Jenna, we have kids. I mean, my dad was a baby when he did that, and I just think, when I think about that, selling everything and just uprooting your entire life for the Lord. But when I now see, I mean, we now know the whole story and see how God blessed him just from that humble, just servant, just radically obeying the Lord.
Yeah, and you and your siblings, your parents are just a testament to that, to the fruit of his life. You know, Abby, I think a lot of people are wondering what's next for CBN. I think you've said this, the best days, and your grandfather said this too, are not behind us.
Yeah, and that's true. And that's something I feel like for months now the Lord has been putting on my heart. And truly, I can't see how that's possible, because when I reflect on the miracles that built this ministry, taking $3 and making it all of this, what we see today, it's shocking. But again, when I went back to this interview and I asked him what's next for CBN, I want to play a clip of what he told me in his answer.
CBN has just begun with a small group of people, of very wonderful, dedicated, consecrated, skillful people, have literally changed the world. And that's not going to stop.
CBN has just begun, and that was shocking because at that point he'd been in ministry for 60 years, but his mission, his heart was to preach the gospel to every tribe, every nation, to prepare the world for the second coming of Christ. I think you and I both know as believers we've got a lot of work to do, and I think CBN is going to be on the forefront of a massive move of the Holy Spirit before the Lord does indeed return.
Yeah. Well, your grandfather paved the way, and Abigail, we just thank you for being here with us this evening to share just your thoughts on his legacy, just tremendous legacy. And we hope you'll join us a week from today as we honor and remember our founder, Pat Robertson, with a memorial service streaming on the CBN News Family app beginning at 12 p.m. Eastern. Well, former President Trump arriving in Florida today. Tomorrow he'll be arraigned over dozens of felony charges involving the illegal handling of classified information. Meanwhile, many Republican leaders are rallying behind him. Here's CBN's Dale Hurd.
Security has been ramped up near the federal courthouse in Miami, where former President Donald Trump is set to face 37 charges he mishandled classified records and obstructed government efforts to get them back. Trump is the first current or former president to face federal criminal charges, and to do so while campaigning for another term.
You get indicted over nothing. You get indicted over the Presidential Records Act, which they don't even admit. They call it the Espionage Act.
Some of Trump's main rivals for the GOP presidential nomination joined him in criticizing the indictment.
Attorney General Merrick Garland, stop hiding behind the special counsel and stand before the American people and explain why this indictment went forward.
Our founding fathers would have absolutely predicted the weaponization that we've seen with these agencies, particularly Justice and FBI.
While former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson and former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie are openly criticizing Trump's behavior regarding the documents. Legal expert Alan Dershowitz calls it an effort to get Trump, but cautions
this is a much stronger indictment than the Bragg indictment, but it's the product of targeting. And the question is, can you prosecute somebody when you targeted that person?
William Barr, who served as Attorney General under Trump, says the indictment is fair.
If even half of it is true, then he's toast. It's a very detailed indictment, and it's very, very damning.
A CBS News poll found that 3 out of 4 likely GOP primary voters believe the indictment is politically motivated, and 61% say it won't change their view of Trump. Trump says he'll never leave the presidential race, even if convicted. One former prosecutor said it's possible Trump could be jailed if convicted on any of the charges. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Thank you, Dale. Nathan Gonzalez is the editor and publisher of Inside Elections and a Faith Nation contributor, and he's with us this evening. Nathan, welcome. So in terms of 2024, Republican presidential candidates, as we heard in there, are joining the former president in lashing out against justice, against FBI, for what they call the weaponization of the federal government. Your thoughts on that?
Well, it's clear that when you hear that term weaponization of the government, that this is one of the key components of the Republican response to this indictment. Now, we should note that the Department of Justice is supposed to act independently from the president, and with the appointment of a special counsel, that was an effort by the Biden administration to take it even one step further away from the attorney general that was appointed by President Biden. But of course, Republicans don't believe that there is any sort of independence at all. But one of the things that I think is important is that just because someone is a candidate doesn't mean that they are allowed to do whatever they want. Sure, it is not great that we have an administration, a DOJ administration prosecuting an opponent, but it's also not, you can't just become a candidate and be immune from all alleged charges. And so this shows me, though, that Republicans aren't moving away from Trump and they're just rallying behind him rather than looking for an alternative in the 2024 race.
Yeah, and a lot of Republicans pointing to Hillary Clinton really is the most salient example in 2016. Deleting her emails, we can kind of get into the whataboutism. There's a lot of that going on. But, Trump is giving public remarks in the night of his indictment with a campaign expected to pull in some $2 million in fundraising, Nathan. Is this first ever federal indictment of a former president going to help him actually get reelected?
I don't know if it might help him win the nomination once again. I think he will have challenges in the general election because this does not invoke any sort of strength with independent voters or would encourage independent voters to trust Trump with another 4 years. But fundraising has never been President Trump's problem. I expect that that fundraising machine will still keep going, particularly after the arraignment. We've seen this before when he was indicted and arraigned, that he used those things all, and that gins up his supporters. But in a general election, he's going to have to move beyond the base of supporters, and that's where things get tricky.
Just a few seconds left, Nathan, but politically, how do you think these GOP presidential candidates should handle the situation? What's the smart play?
This should be an opportunity. Your opponent has a significant misstep. I think they should look at his electability and try to paint Trump as a liability, because he is going to be he'll be an easier opponent for President Biden to take on. So I think they try to make the electability case. And if Republicans don't want to, if Trump supporters don't want to hear it, that's on them. But you have to at least take advantage of this opportunity.
All right, Nathan Gonzalez of Inside Elections, always good to see you. Thank you for joining us this Monday. Have a great night. Good to see you, Jen. Well, decreasing membership and controversy over women pastors. Why the Southern Baptist Convention is reaching a boiling point. Next. Welcome back. Tonight, the Southern Baptist Convention is wrapping up day one of its annual meeting in New Orleans with several hot topics, including a drop in membership. The debate over women pastors will heat up tomorrow as Rick Warren speaks. Charlene Aaron has the story.
The nation's largest Protestant denomination has seen a decline in membership for years and a drop in the overall number of congregations. This comes as debate about women pastors in the Southern Baptist Convention reaches a boiling point. Former Saddleback Church pastor Rick Warren recently issued a tough challenge to the denomination, calling it out for what he calls hypocrisy when it comes to the role of women in the church. The 2023 SBC will kick out churches for having a woman preach, while honoring Charles Stanley, SBC president, who was saved through a woman preaching, Warren tweeted. Earlier this year, the SBC's executive committee ousted 5 churches, including Saddleback, for having women pastors. That resulted from Warren ordaining 3 women as pastors in 2021. The executive committee cited Saddleback for naming Stacy Wood, wife of the church's lead pastor Andy Wood, as a teaching pastor. Saddleback is challenging that, with Warren expected to make a formal appeal at the SBC's annual meeting in New Orleans. That controversy, plus the membership decline, are pressing on Southern Baptists right now.
I've been talking about this for years. We have to expect it.
Statistics from 2022 show the number of members in Southern Baptist churches down around 13 million, down by more than 450,000 from 2021, the largest single drop in more than 100 years. Dr. Albert Mohler, president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, spoke with CBN News about the shrinking numbers.
There was a time when the Southern Baptist Convention was riding the crest of a largely churched and Christianized culture in which people gain social capital by joining our churches. Well, guess what? They cash out social capital by joining our churches now.
Mohler puts part of the blame on the pandemic.
Part of this, quite frankly, also is the disequilibrium that came with COVID. But there's no doubt that you really found out who was with you on the other side of COVID and who's going to show up to church.
Warren challenges that assessment.
17 years of decline year after year after year is not a glitch. And the loss of 500,000 members in a single year cannot be ignored.
Some argue the decline is driven by recent revelations about the failure of leaders to handle sexual abuse cases. In 2022, an investigation of the executive committee showed a pattern of resistance to abuse claims. Religion reporter Bob Smetana has covered the issue extensively.
I think this whole issue of sexual abuse is going to continue. So last year they passed some significant reforms on how to deal with abuse, including a list of pastors that were abusive. There's a real disagreement over who should be on that list.
Meanwhile, transgender issues are also likely to be on the agenda in New Orleans. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Thank you, Charlene. The crisis at the southern border comes to California in the form of forced labor and black market cannabis. Up next, why it's a threat to the water supply. The crisis at the U.S. southern border has far-reaching repercussions, from black market cannabis tainted with toxins to drug cartels shipping migrants to Northern California, where they're forced to work on illegal marijuana farms. These farms are also threatening California's water supply. CBN's contributing correspondent Chuck Holton reports.
The impact of migrants pouring across the U.S. southern border is reaching here in Humboldt County, California, helping fuel a rise in illicit cannabis operations staffed by undocumented workers. Instead of escaping poverty and oppression, many migrants often find a rude awakening here in America.
So modern-day slavery is happening here. Labor trafficking is a major deal here when it comes to marijuana. Like I said, it's something to where, you know, this is still very much organized crime. And we have organized crime and syndicates from all over the world that are here in California that are invested in growing marijuana illegally and funneling through the markets, again, throughout America and throughout the world. And so they're bringing in their own labor and they're forcing them here to work against their will, and sometimes they're sold into sex slavery, sometimes they're just used for labor. And we even had a case here about 10 years ago where we had 2 people from Guatemala that were shot.
It's not just that these illegal marijuana grows here in California are a driver of 70% of all of the illegal marijuana consumed in the United States. It's also not just a driver of a whole lot of illegal migration to work those grows. But one of the biggest problems caused by these illegal grows is right here, what you see behind me. The very precious resource of clean, clear, drinkable water here in California as they come off a 100-year drought. These plants take a lot of water, and they take a lot of this drinking water off the table for the consumers here in the Golden State.
This stuff is obviously, we have a regulated market now in California under Prop 64. Many states have regulated cannabis, but this is the illegal stuff that will never be allowed. It's on public and private land. It's not grown with permits. It's not organic. It has deadly pesticides on it. Some of them, brother, that are so deadly they were banned by the EPA in America 20 years ago.
In addition to the health threat posed by pesticides, the men running these secret farms are often armed and aggressive.
They're armed. They don't, want to give up in many times. There's a lot of poisons that we run across, and exposure could be deadly. And actually on the private lands, it's even more dangerous because it's so much concentrated.
The origin of these hidden operations traces back to a familiar evil south of the border.
And we got to remember that it isn't only a cannabis problem that these cartels are part of. These cartels are also the same groups. If they're growing black market cannabis that's tainted with these toxics, they're also trafficking, dirty fentanyl pills that are killing hundreds of thousands of Americans.
Dealing with these issues daily, Sheriff Hansel believes he's in the right place.
We see in Humboldt County and in California good versus evil. We see the evil of child abuse, of drugs, of sex trafficking. We see people's worst days every single day. And we have a very difficult time sometimes dealing with that and coping with that. And I believe if you didn't have a Christ-centered life, you can't rationalize that. God has put me here, and this is my mission, the Sheriff's Office, the people of Humboldt County, and when God tells me that it's time to go, I'll go.
From Northern California, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
Still ahead, meet the newest member of the CBN News family. This is Faith Nation. And finally tonight, a very special announcement. CBN News Capitol Hill correspondent Matt Galka and his wife Alex welcomed their first child into the world last week. Meet Matteo Alexander, who made his big debut late Thursday night. Matt says both Matteo and Alex are happy, healthy, and getting settled into their new routine at home. And from all of us here at CBN News, congratulations. He's absolutely beautiful. We'll leave it there. Thanks for joining us. Have a great night.